Welcome to London Neighbourhood Histories, brought to you by LondonFuse and the London Heritage Council as part of Doors Open London. During this audio tour, you'll have the opportunity to explore Old East Village. Much of the information in this tour is from the article London Neighbourhood Histories, Old East Village's Artistic Roots Run Deep, published on londonfuse.ca, researched and written by Amelia Eqbal. LondonFuse's Neighbourhood History series highlights and chronicles a sliver of the rich, layered heritage of some of London's neighbourhoods, the diverse individuals who have lived within them, and the events that have impacted their development. The tour begins at the northwest corner of Dundas and Adelaide Streets. We invite you to enjoy the tour from home or walk along the route we describe, taking time to pause and listen at your own pace. If you're listening to this tour while walking, please ensure you remain aware of your surroundings and follow traffic signals. Before we start the tour, we would like to acknowledge the history of the traditional territory and honor the long-standing relationships of the three local First Nations of this land in place in southwestern Ontario. What is now known as London, Ontario, is located on the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, Lenape-Wook, and Ottawandaran peoples on the lands connected with the London Township and Sombre Treaties of 1796 and the Dish with One Spoon Covenant Wampum. Take a moment to look at the buildings on the east side of Adelaide and Dundas before you cross the street and begin walking on Dundas. The sense of community and entrepreneurial spirit found in OEV is ostensibly as old as the area itself. In 1819, pioneer settler Noble English claimed ownership of the area, which later became known as part of the English Survey. The community began to take shape in the mid-19th century when Murray Anderson, the City of London's first mayor, established the Globe Foundry Ironworks near Adelaide and Dundas, in the spot where you can now find the London Police Service's headquarters. With the addition of Lilly's Corners, a stretch of businesses founded by resident Charles Lilly, across the street in the 1870s, Dundas Street soon became the business corridor it remains to this day. Lilly's Corner can still be seen today at the southeast corner of Dundas and Adelaide. Charles Lilly moved to London as a young man and worked as a telegraph operator before becoming a grocer. Around 1869, he moved his business to the southeast corner of Dundas and Adelaide Streets, where he also ran the Crown Hotel. In 1871, he built a 2-story block on the corner, and by 1873, 5 brick stores on Adelaide Street. It is a mystery that the inscription on the corner of the Lilly block reads 1867, since there were no buildings on the site at that date. The post office took the name Lilly's Corners when it was opened in 1872 with Charles Lilly as postmaster. 2 years later, a telegraph office was established in the same building. Continue to head east on Dundas Street. Defined by its historic roots and indomitable spirit, London's Old East Village exudes a unique and timeless charm. A short distance east of the downtown core, Old East Village has cultivated a distinct front porch culture over the years, based around its emphasis on buying local and the palpable sense of community pride. Strolling past all the independent cafes, bookshops, and restaurants on Dundas Street, it appears that the area more affectionately known as OEV has a mind and history of its own. Old East is roughly bordered by the Canadian Pacific Railway corridor to the north, Adelaide Street to the west, and Canadian National Railway Via Rail lines to the south, and the CNCP feeder lines at the old Kellogg's plant and Ashland Avenue to the east. Indeed, these borders reflect the area's significant industrial history. When the town of London East, an incorporated municipality, merged with the City of London in 1885, the community soon became a major driver for the local economy due to its fledgling yet booming industrial pursuits in ironworks, oil, and railways. From the late 19th century until the Great Depression in the 1930s, London's population grew steadily each year. London East became home to the many artists, creatives, and immigrants working in the nearby manufacturing and retail industries. The area offered affordable land and housing close to their work, as the proximity to the factories made it a less desirable area to live. With this influx of people earning an income, the village evolved into a stable and prosperous community capable of sustaining the businesses popping up on Dundas Street. The residential area was teeming with tradespeople and artisans and those who supported them. Our next stop as we walk east on Dundas is Palace Theatre at 710 Dundas Street. But it isn't the first Palace Theatre in London, or at the address even. The original theatre, constructed in 1929, was praised as London's first high-class neighbourhood theatre. In addition to having a stage and orchestra pit, the theatre played silent movies. The subsequent stock market crash and growing interest in talkies, or motion pictures with audible dialogue, meant that it was the last theatre built in London until the 1940s. The 1950s saw massive renovations as the building transformed into a more modern movie theatre. Renamed Park Theatre, it operated as a cinema until 1989. In 1990, a local theatre group, the Community Players, purchased the building and returned it to the original name. They undertook extensive renovations, utilizing the 1929 blueprints to recreate the original lobby ticket booth and marquee. As of 2020, the theatre was rebranded to the Palace Theatre Arts Commons and is home to the London Community Players, London Fringe, London Youth Theatre Education, and New Stage. A couple storefronts east of the Palace Theatre once was another important cultural gathering space, the Embassy Hotel and Embassy Cultural House at 732 Dundas Street. Though the building no longer stands, this is our next stop. Alex Hassan, an early member of the London, Ontario Muslim community, arrived in Canada circa World War I. He and his brother worked in a leather tannery on Heyman Street in London. Initially built in the early 1900s, Hassan opened the 44-room Sunnyside Hotel in 1936. His family later opened a grocery store, and in 1947, they bought a steel fabricating business, naming it Hassan Steel. Alex Hassan later sold the hotel business to his brother, and it was renamed the Embassy Hotel in 1957. In 1983, a humble arts incubator would carve out a space for itself in OEV, namely in the back of the restaurant at the iconic Embassy Hotel. The Embassy Cultural House was a collaborative space established for artists by artists. Founders Gemali Hassan, Ron Benner, and Eric Stock modeled the space after establishments in Europe where creative minds could commune, collaborate, and inspire each other. With an espresso machine, a modest gallery space, and a commitment to addressing issues that mattered to the community on a local and global scale, the incubator's central mission was to challenge London's art community to go beyond art for the gallery and carve out a space where art and activism could intersect, unencumbered by bureaucracy. The space welcomed performances and gallery showings of all kinds until its closure in 2009. Over the years, the Embassy Hotel also made a name for itself as a venue for alternative concerts and other live shows. For its part, the Embassy Cultural House brought together an eclectic audience of patrons and artists alike from around the world, across generations and disciplines, whether they had arrived there on purpose or by accident. It played an integral role in the movement towards artist-run centers in the city. Unfortunately, the Embassy Hotel burned down just 2 months after it closed, and the lot remained empty until recently. A new community housing project is being constructed on the land, aptly named the Embassy Commons. We'll continue east on Dundas Street, next stopping at the Aeolian Hall Performing Arts Centre at 795 Dundas Street. The story of the Aeolian Hall begins in 1882. The London East Town Council bought a plot of land from David E. Glass, former mayor of London, and authorized $7,000 towards the construction of a town hall in the hope of preventing any attempt at annexation from the City of London. Renowned architect George F. Durand designed the building. It combines high Victorian and Italianate design, a masterpiece of tall windows and biochromatic brickwork. The project went over budget by double the original estimate. In 1885, East London found itself in severe financial trouble and was forced to amalgamate with the City of London. Upon amalgamation with the City of London, the main floor was converted into Fire Station No. 2. And in 1915, the London Public Library opened the East End branch, the first branch location for the library, on the ground floor. Over the years, the building has also been home to courts, a public school, workshops, sales rooms, Oddfellows Lodge, Goodwill Industries, London School of Telegraphy, and storefronts before becoming a musical performance venue in 1969. It wasn't the first time music graced the spot. Around the turn of the 20th century, many outdoor concerts and plays were held in the evenings behind the building. Traveling herb doctors often sponsored such events, peddling their so-called cure-all medicines to the audience. The walls of Aeolian Hall have witnessed many remarkable moments from the city's past. Most memorable among them, perhaps, is the first convention of the Canadian League for the Advancement of Colored People, which was held in October of 1927. Founded in London in 1924, the League's vision was to improve the health, education, and social support of Black people in Canada. In fact, it was the only organization in Canada geared towards this aim at the time. Hundreds of people traveled that night from Toronto, Windsor, and the United States to discuss topics such as racial prejudice and the unemployment of Black youth at the East London venue. While there is still much more work to be done in combating the anti-Black racism and discrimination that persists today, strides were made in the city that evening. Continuing east on Dundas Street, you'll head towards the Western Fair District. A crown jewel of the area, the Western Fair District has been a fan favorite amongst locals and tourists alike since it first arrived in Old East London in what was then known as Salters Grove in 1887. The not-for-profit Agricultural Association keeps visitors coming back for its year-round variety of vendors and community events, the most recognized being its annual agricultural fair. In fact, since its inception in 1868, the physical fair has only been canceled on 2 occasions, from 1940 to 1947 during World War II, when the grounds were used as barracks and training ground by the military, and in 2020 when it moved online due to COVID-19. The very first Western Fair was held in 1868, northeast of the current location of Victoria Park. The fair was held there annually until it moved to its current location in Old East Village in 1887. The Western Fair Market is located southeast of the intersection of Ontario and Dundas Streets in the Confederation Building. As you approach, imagine the building in 1928 when it first opened. Built to replace the Western Fair's Crystal Palace, which burned down in 1927, it still retains much of its charm and vintage structure. Did you know that the location used to be a graveyard? Starting in 1848, St. Paul's Cathedral had their cemetery there as they needed burial grounds outside of London, and East London was not annexed by the city at the time. Wesleyan cemeteries, along with Salters Grove Park, could also be found in the area. A bylaw enforced in 1879 banned East London burials, and every grave was moved to the Woodland Cemetery between 1880 and 1886. Keep walking east on Dundas past the Confederation Building and you'll see a small orange and red stucco building. Dating back to the outset of the 20th century, the fairgrounds were instrumental in developing London's art scene. After all, the city's first art gallery opened alongside the Queen's Park site in the autumn of 1912. The building was initially used as a studio, as well as to display and sell art pieces. Since then, it's been used as a bank, a seniors arts and crafts center, and most recently as storage for the fair's museum and archives. Charlotte Harris, whose father built London's historic Eldon House, wrote in her diary at the time that in the little city of London, numbering less than 50,000 inhabitants, there seems to be an art spirit far in advance of many larger cities. The exterior of the building, which still bears the Arts Building in bold letters, was restored in 2015. You can find it in Queen's Park near Engine 86. Speaking of Engine 86, take a moment to pause at the historic Locomotive before heading back west on Dundas. The Canadian Locomotive Company built Engine 86 in 1910. After 48 years of service with the Grand Trunk Railway and the Canadian National Railway, it was donated to the city in 1958, commemorating London's 100-year history as a railway centre. At the peak of operations in the 1940s, nearly 4,000 Londoners worked for the CNR, the CPR, and the London and Port Stanley Railway. Most of these workers were employed in the massive repair shops near the Western Fairgrounds. After CNR donated it to the city in 1958, Engine 86 had to be moved from the CNR shop to Queen's Park. To move it, they used 60-foot sections of rail, which were moved from the rear to the front as the locomotive was pulled along with a winch. It is estimated that the move would take 12 hours, but the locomotive, once capable of traveling over 90 kilometers an hour, took 4 days to reach its destination. As you walk west on Dundas Street, back towards where you started your tour, you'll see a large heritage house on the southwest corner of Ontario and Dundas Streets at 869 Dundas Street. Known as the Heyman House, the 2.5-story buff brick residence was constructed by John Heyman in 1890 and designated a heritage building in 1983. Heyman was a trained bricklayer and builder in England before coming to Canada in 1868. He founded J. Heyman & Sons, one of London's major contracting firms. The firm built many important London buildings, such as St. Mary's Church, Lady Beck Public School, and Aeolian Hall, as well as completing the alterations to St. Paul's Cathedral in downtown London. The firm also introduced the first apartment building to London in 1912 with the construction of the Heyman Apartments on the northeast corner of Queen's Avenue and Wellington Street. As you continue walking west on Dundas Street, take some time to reflect on the long-standing artistic and cultural character of Old East Village. You'll once again pass by Aeolian Hall. The Aeolian Hall Musical Arts Association, founded in 2009, provides art programs. One noteworthy initiative is the El Sistema Aeolian, a free, intensive after-school music program. The creative spirit of the village does not just simply live on, but actively contributes to the restoration and preservation of the community. It was never more evident than when the Aeolian Hall and other local businesses in OEV hosted fundraisers to support the survivors of the devastating 2019 Woodman Ave explosion. In a historic yet up-and-coming neighborhood such as this one, carving out a space for the next generation of artists is just one way to honor the buildings and communities past while simultaneously investing in the viability of its future. Designated an Ontario Heritage Conservation District in 2006, it's no secret that the area originally known as London East is home to some of London's finest cultural landmarks. Whether you're coming to see a performance at the Palace Theatre or catch a concert at Aeolian Hall, visit the Western Fair Market, or take in some public art, including Susan Day's ceramic mosaic murals, you're bound to feel a connection to the culture and the residents, both past and present. As you walk up Dundas Street and reach Elizabeth Street, you'll be greeted by a beautiful wayfinding mosaic created by Susan Day Ceramics. It is one of many murals and public art installations that make Old East Village so vibrant. If you have a moment, head north on Elizabeth to take in the beautiful mosaic created by London Clay Art Centre. Another artistic collective rooted in Old East is the London Potters Guild, which has been nurturing the clay arts community in southwestern Ontario since 1981. Known across the province, country, and beyond for its programming, the London Potters Guild operates out of the London Clay Arts Centre at 664 Dundas Street. Almost 30 years after it was founded, the charitable organization moved into the Victorian-era building in the heart of OEV and soon after set about restoring and renovating their new home. The London Clay Art Centre is one of, if not the only, guild-owned and operated clay art centres in the country. The centre is a prime example of commercial heritage restoration. The building, which dates back to 1896, has been retrofitted with accessibility measures to serve the community better and now runs its heating and cooling systems on renewable energy. The Ceramics Centre has done a lot for the OEV at large. Between the allure of their community mosaic projects around the area and the support of the OEV Business Improvement Area's revitalization efforts and their involvement with several local festivals and fundraisers, the London Clay Arts Centre is heavily grounded in and engaged with the surrounding community. Continue walking west on Dundas. When you reach Adelaide, head north to our final stop on this tour, Banting House National Historic Site. As you likely know, Sir Frederick Banting co-discovered insulin, a life-saving treatment for diabetes. But did you know that this house is where it all began? Banting lived and practiced in London for only a short time, as he was not very successful at acquiring patients. Located at 442 Adelaide Street North, the site is now known as the birthplace of insulin. It is the house where Banting woke up at 2 o'clock in the morning on October 31st, 1920, with the idea that led to the discovery of insulin. One of the most interesting parts of the house is how much is dedicated to Banting as a person, not just insulin's co-inventor. There are displays that focus on his service in both world wars as a medic and a collection of his artwork. Take some time to walk around Banting Square next to the house to see Banting's statue, the Flame of Hope, and other Banting-inspired art. Thank you for joining us on this audio tour of Old East Village. We hope you enjoyed and learned something new about your neighborhood. London Neighbourhood Histories audio tour is brought to you by LondonFuse and the London Heritage Council as a part of Doors Open London. Find more London Neighbourhood Histories at londonfuse.ca/heritage.